Hi, we're sisters Brenda and Elaine.
Welcome to the Body Wealth Podcast, a space for conversations about the wealth that really matters.
Your best health. There have been several recent examples of prominent Black women leaders under attack. And we both know how hard it is on our mental and physical well-being when we're working in an environment that doesn't embrace us.
So we're very happy to be speaking with Jacquelyn Howard on today's episode. She's a woman who has been a corporate leader for over 30 years. She's going to be sharing with us how she has managed working in these environments that have often been hostile and how she has maintained her well-being and personal health.
And even found lots of joy.
Today, I'd like to welcome Jacquelyn Howard to the Body Wealth Podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing outstanding. I live in Seattle. I am a mother of two, a wife of one, and I've been married for 22 years. I retired in 2022 from Starbucks. I'd been at three major multinational companies, but I am not through with my life. So I did want to state that even though I'm 60, it is just another chapter.
Can you just give us a sort of a brief overview of your corporate career?
I spent the formidable years of my career in what's called supply chain. I think everyone is well aware of what that is thanks to COVID, but it wasn't well known back in the day. And actually my first career after graduate school was at DuPont. And as I thought about it, I said, that's before it was even defined as supply chain, because I worked on the very, very, very start of a supply chain in the textile fibers industry. And then I moved from that job to a job with McDonald's Corporation. That's the hamburger company. And that role was purchasing, which is only a facet of supply chain. We rebranded ourselves over the years, and I became a leader within the supply chain department. And then I went on to Starbucks and spent the last 4 years of my career at Starbucks in the supply chain. So really interesting. I did not plan on doing this when I was 12 or 17. So, doors opened for me, and I just took advantage of those doors and took leaps of faith along the way. And, it turned out to be a pretty doggone good career.
It was also a very successful career, and you were lauded in many circles for the work that you've done in all of those roles. So
Elaine,
what things would you think contributed to that success?
Yeah, I think I'm super curious. I'm a question person. It's interesting because sometimes you think a skill is actually a skill, and people look at it differently depending on who they are, not me. So I think that curiosity goes a long way, because you can very well get in a job and just do the job. But I was very interested in how the inner workings of organizations interacted. And so I spent a lot of time meeting with people in and around the organization. So they saw me a lot involved, asking questions, asking how I could help. So I'm a helper. I like to see people succeed. And so when I did something, I said, who am I influencing or role modeling? Sometimes unconsciously. And then people will come back and say, I was so glad you're in that meeting. You asked a question. You looked out for somebody when they were overspoken. And so I found myself actually being successful because of those major skills. And then, I give myself some credit. I'm pretty damn smart. So I remember you got to step back sometimes, because we're taught to be humble and quiet and sit in the corner and just do our work. But, I can roll with the best of them. I had to really recognize that and not mute it. Especially in a corporate world, because we're underestimated. I would seek feedback and mentorship, and that for sure helped my careers. So people knew I can get the job done. I work well with people. I could be a challenge because I ask questions. And I like to break the status quo. So sometimes that gets in somebody's ear and becomes an issue versus something that's a benefit.
I think you're still being quite modest, because you were quite high-level executive, and some would say a trailblazer. And so it couldn't have all been easy. What were some obstacles along the way, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I was a leader. At some points, I was in my career, I was actually in charge of the entire supply chain for China for McDonald's, and that is no small feat. And Elaine knows for sure. I was crying sometimes. I mean, I'll be honest, it was not easy. You're right. And there were things I'm like, why is this happening to me? And then I had to keep reminding myself, it's not me, it's the situation, it's the company, it's the environment, it's the risk. And so I would have to take that burden off my shoulders, because we can get very deep in self-inflicted pain and hardship. And so I made a decision to say, okay, stop. It's not you, it's the situation. And if I created something, I would admit it, right? But yeah, there weren't easy days all the time, but there were ways out, ways through, and ways around. And I think I learned quickly when something was going wrong to call a mentor, call a friend,
Mhm.
call outside, support person, whatever it was, and get some advice, to say, okay, this is what's happening. I know I can depend on you for some truth. Am I doing something wrong? But I had to learn that. I had to learn that. At one point, one of my managers actually um, called me, and he has been in my career path, even my friendship circle for a very long time. But he saw me trying to do everything. We're super women, right? And he
Mhm.
said, let me give you some advice. You can't do everything. You're going to burn out. You're too young to burn out. He said, if you give your team a little bit more work, you can take a break and they will start really broadening and be appreciative of you. But that advice really woke me up because I was burning out. I was just having kids, and here I was traveling like 75% of the time, trying to be at every meeting, on every call, and it just wasn't sustainable. It wasn't doable.
You're also not giving your team members space to grow.
Bingo.
So, that was some great advice he gave you, not just for protecting
Outstanding.
yourself, but also making you a better leader.
Yeah, and it's a maturity thing too. I think we're all trying to make our mark when we're young in our career, and we think we have to do everything, and then we dismiss, to your point, the people around you that need a little bit more exposure, need to take some risk, right? And they're still
Mhm.
growing. So I really I absorb that feedback, and I cite it all the time because I tell young leaders, stop trying to do everything. Think about people that don't get the exposure, that don't have um, their boss supporting them, their manager supporting them. Give them a little bit, and somebody says, how can I help? Find something to give them. And so I went on 2 maternity leaves and 1 sabbatical, and guess what? The company went through some stuff, and they came out the other side, and I actually got some rest.
You said, "Sometimes I cried." So I'd like you to give us a concrete example because 'cause we're talking about Black women in corporate
Woo!
leadership, right? So give
Okay.
us a concrete example of a time that what made you cry.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we're taught that you shouldn't cry at work, although we hear about white women tears. We know all about that for sure. I've had that experience. But I mean, there are times at work where I was getting, emotional. I was having a hard time, and I would find, a quiet room to kind of get myself together and maybe make a phone call. I remember specifically in China because there was some crazy stuff happening in China, and I was like barely sleeping, barely eating. It was tough. And I remember I called Elaine one time because on top of that, life happens. My grandmother was sick and dying on top of this crisis I was going through. And I was taking a walk at 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. And I called Elaine. I'm like, oh, my grandmother. And it's very nice to have a conversation with somebody across the water who actually understood me and knew me, and helped me kind of get to a different place. But there were times I was like, okay, you have pushed the wrong button with me personally. And that's the other piece of advice is no one is big enough in an organization to embarrass you, to humiliate you, to make you feel small. It's a job, it's a career, but they are no better than you. And so even though
Yeah.
they might be higher level, they have no right to disrespect you. And that was another piece of
Amen.
advice they gave me because I worked in organizations where I had customers, I had a supply chain organization to lead, and there's interaction with the whole supplier base, and it could be big wigs and owners and founders. And then I had at some point in my career franchisees that were sometimes very tough to work with and got a little too big for their britches. So after 1 or 2 times of being humiliated in front of people and being put across the around across the fire, and I would say, okay, that's not an appropriate question. I had to grow into that, finding my voice,
Good.
figuring it out. But at some point I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? First of all, I was in a job that was critical to the company. I was in a level that was valuable, right? I wasn't just, over here spending money. I was creating value. Thirdly, right, wrong, or indifferent, as a Black woman, there was some buffer there as long as I was working hard and I had mentorship, right? Because the worst thing that happens, you can fire me, but I'm not going to tolerate this behavior, your attitude, your approach to me. This is a business discussion. Don't attack me, my values, my family, my background. let's keep it where it's supposed to be. But I had to grow into that.
Good. That's great.
Well, I'm sure as a Black woman, in these spaces, which were historically and predominantly white male,
Yes.
you had to face some additional stressors that maybe other people in those roles didn't have to face.
Amen.
Um,
Yeah.
what were some of those, and how did you work to overcome those?
Oh, yeah. The supply chain's known to be predominantly white male. I mean, I can still go into a meeting room and there's not as much representation as there should be at the top. So I will say that out loud because during COVID, we saw the effects of what a supply chain really looks like from the
Hmm.
ownership, who's in the boardroom, who's making the decisions, but who's on the front line, who's at the retail stores, who's at the beef packing plants, who's working the land. They're
Hmm.
brown. They're brown and black. And so that in and of itself there's a whole different conversation around how our country's been built, right? And who's really managing the money and who actually gets their hands into it. But yes, I would walk in a room with my team, and guess what? I was never the leader because I was a
Right.
black woman. So they go to the white man and say, "Hey, I need a decision on." They were like, "Boss is over there." I would just sit back and say, "Here we go again." You just make big assumptions. On the phone, folks couldn't tell where I was from. I don't really have a heavy accent of any sort. So when they would actually now with Zoom see me, they're like, "Oh, oh." And so there is heavy bias. There's heavy bias in this country. We all have it, but the bias towards Black women is she's there as a EEOC hire. Um, she's found somebody in the organization to elevate her. She can't be smart, all that blah. But fortunately, and even though it's hard, fortunately I was raised different, right? And I think the foundation of how I was raised is sky's the limit. Education matters. I've been very fortunate to have a very supportive family over the years. My siblings were all very close, and everyone's at a different point in their lives. And I would call and say, "Hey, what do you think about me taking this job? Hey, what do you think about me quitting this job?"
Because quitting is the most powerful thing you can do.
Girl, let's talk about that for a minute.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about when is the time you just realized it was time to quit?
Yeah, so there's two points of view on that I have, and I got this from a very wise woman, the president of Spelman, Janetta Cole. She led Spelman, and she made a point because she came to speak at McDonald's when I was there. We had great speakers back in the day, and she said the best time to leave is when it's comfortable to stay. The best time
Mm.
to leave is when it's easy to stay. So I could have stayed at any job and just moved along and kind of putzed around. And, I felt like I needed to continue to grow. And when I was feeling stifled, that was time for me to move on. Now, it could have been just a job. So within the three companies I worked for over the 30 plus years, I moved a number of times with each of them. Except for Starbucks, I kind of came here and stayed in 4 years and I was done. But I moved here for Starbucks, right? But the jobs either got I felt plateaued. I felt like I wasn't growing. I felt like I needed to make decisions based on, am I feeling stifled? Do I have the support? Or is there something more challenging out there? I felt like if I didn't go to China at that point, my job would have flatlined at McDonald's. And going to China and becoming the vice president, head of supply chain for that company, just accelerated my career out inside and outside the company. Mostly outside, because when I got back, I said, what can I possibly do in the United States that would top this with this company?
Hmm.
Nothing.
We all have been hearing about Claudine Gay, about
Yes, ma'am.
um, Antoinette Candia Bailey, and even Ketanji Brown Jackson. What the things that we have seen Black women leaders have to go through is very disturbing. And I just want to know what was your experience as a leader? Did you experience any of the things that we've seen?
Well, our country has never been signed up to support Black people. I mean, I'm just being blunt because, I'm 60 and I can say things that are true, right? And I mean, if you look at it, it's just, if you read the book, The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, it also talks about this country decision makers rather shortchange the country than give equal rights to African Americans. We had to
Hmm.
fight for the right to be freed. We had to fight for the right to vote. We had to fight for the right of Black women to vote. We had to fight for education, equal, you know, integrated schools, and I'm not sure if that was
To
a
be able to live places, to be able to have certain types of jobs, all those
housing,
things
all
were,
that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're always fighting, and it's exhausting, right? At best, it's
Mhm.
exhausting. And so, yes, in the work environment, I had to fight for the right to be in a room. There's meetings I should have been. I'm like, why are you not inviting me to a meeting?
Mhm.
I had to fight for the right to actually say something. Sometimes it's like I just had my hand up and you guys just totally talked over me. I mean, small things like that, but also I had to fight for the right to have a career. I mean, honestly, the decision to go to China was not wrought with opportunities because the first person they asked was not even on the succession plan.
Mhm.
I was supposed to be asked, and fortunately for me, well, someone in HR called my manager on the carpet and said, "Hey, you passed over your succession plan process. You didn't even ask Jackie because they had actually
Fantastic.
made a decision for me that I wasn't going to go because I had 2 kids and a husband." I will sit in a room every day when it comes time for personnel discussions, which again, we got to be where we're supposed to be. So I was able to be in the room when they were talking about personnel decisions and potential and promotions. And inevitably, someone's passing over a highly talented person of color. And I would raise my hand and say, I don't understand why are they not in the discussion? Why are they not in the pool of candidates? And then they would bring things up that weren't even legit or justified. And I learned from a Black woman how to push back. It's like, give me an example of how you saw that. You know,
Yep.
tell me more about
Good.
what you said because you threw something out there that now is tainting people's point of view of this person that's not even valid. So
And
those kind of
if it is,
conversations,
I'm sure somebody else who looked differently did the same thing.
bingo. So back to your point around Dr. Claudine Gay. People are saying now she wasn't even qualified for the job. And I actually looked up yesterday how many people have been accused of plagiarism that are in very large roles, and guess what? The list is very long.
Oh, yeah,
So,
and
Well,
and
we
what does
know as a
plagiarism?
Black woman, she would not have gotten that job if she were not more than qualified.
We know that, but I could not believe the amount of commentary that basically said she wasn't qualified. And
because
come
the
on,
standard is we have to be perfect. There's so many other people who a mistake can be a mistake, but we have to be perfect.
I actually once I decided with Shelton to go over and visit, we made a decision it was going to be good for all 4 of us, 2 kids and husband and wife. And I remember the manager who actually went outside the boundaries of the succession plan saying, well, aren't you worried about being a minority over there? I just laughed. I
I'm a
literally
minority
said, what up with this country? Am I not?
over here.
I said, what's interesting about your question? Because, again, I'm getting my wits about me as I'm getting longer in the tooth of my career. I said, you would be uncomfortable. You know why? Because you would be the minority and you wouldn't be used to that. But us, we're used
Yeah.
to it.
We have the
We're
experience to do
adaptable.
that, right?
We're
You
pros
don't.
at this. We're pros at this. I'm the so-called minority in this company. I'm
Mhm,
used to this. I'm
mhm.
adaptable. I'm flexible. I'm smart. So I said, this is the perfect move for me because of that. And guess what? Honestly, Elaine experienced this when she came over. Those people in the office, in my team, loved us. You know why? Because we were committed. We came as a family. Everyone met my kids. They knew Shelton. They had no bias about all the stuff that happens here. In fact, half of them had
Mhm.
never even heard about it in chattel slavery, which shocked me. But you know what? So you got to challenge people because I actually just recently was on a call for a CEO search for one of the boards I'm on, and already people were speculating about the candidates in um, particular Black women. And I said, before we have all these assumptions about whether or not she can do this and blah, 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 what her career looks like, how long she's going to be around, let's interview her. Let's put the
Mhm.
noise on mute. This white guy said, well, I wasn't really pontificating. I said, yeah, you kind of were. But I said, it's okay because, let the person speak for themselves. So I
And
learned
let's
that.
stay grounded in the facts. Let's stay grounded in the facts of this candidate, not your speculation of her.
Yes. And I do think, you asked about what made me successful. I was fortunate, and I say this all the time, and I continue to be fortunate to be surrounded by so many powerful, supportive Black women. And I
Mm.
mentioned earlier to you, well, I feel sad for those Black women that don't have that. And I don't know why. they not may not be experiencing it is because they're not throwing the right vibe off, or they're not finding each other. But I'm telling you right now, when I worked, especially at McDonald's, and they saw me walk in the door, I can't tell you how fast a black woman came over and said, "We heard about you. Let's go to lunch. Let's
Oh,
have a conversation
nice.
about how to be successful."
Yeah.
And those were my closest friends, and a lot of them still are my closest friends. Some of them have passed on, but I recall going to lunch, and they were just laying out how to function, how to be successful, and I felt like, wow, and I wanted to pass that on to other people because we need each other. And
Yeah.
it's not supporting, well, it is supporting black women because we're black women, but it's also because we can also tell the truth to each other.
Yeah.
There's times when we'd be messing up and we got to get somebody pull on our coattail and put us back a little. So I do believe that, black women have to look out for each other, not look at, there's only room for one. There's a lot of room out there. And we can be formidable and positive and additive, and we have been.
So, do you think the little slights, like not being recognized as a leader, and then the day to day having to
Mhm.
constantly be on your toes, I would imagine, in these environments, can affect our health, our physical and mental health?
This is the topic I wanted to really talk with you all about, weathering. And it was a term created by a professor out of University of Michigan who studied black women and black people in general and started really using this word. And she was actually thinking about the weather at one point, but she said, this wears people out. And the thing is, when you start getting these little small nicks and cuts, it's like you can just fall back and say, oh, it's so horrible. Someone help me. We got to keep pushing through. We have to keep paying the bills. We have to keep taking care of the kids, taking care of parents. You know, we got to keep moving. And so we're still like cut, bruised, bleeding, weathered, and we're still moving through. And guess what? The book that I'm reading now is called The Body Keeps Score.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that book talks about you can't just keep your body is going to react to all that um, negative hormonal chemical reaction of being always in the fifth gear, always trying to like push forward, always highly stressed, sad. Your body is keeping score and it's going to come out. And I am convinced, as you all know, I'm a breast cancer survivor. We talked about this. I didn't get that stuff because I got 16 people in my family had breast cancer. I do think the stress of working so very hard, traveling so very much. I mean, if I added up all the miles I've flown over the world, if I think about all that I had to go through these meetings, Elaine, Brenda, you talking about all this other toxic environment stuff, it gets into you, and it's like when you get to call now, I totally exercise as much as I can. I just told you took a long walk today, peaceful. I got into rowing. I did step aerobics. You name it, I've tried it.
The best piece of advice I got as a Black woman leader was don't take it personal, right? So when people say crazy things, it's not about you, even if it sounds like it's about you. And I
Yeah.
think you said something like that. And sometimes I was able to do that, but sometimes I wasn't.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it just hits you and you just want to sit in the dark, right? And so that's where I feel like those are the times that even when I had my game face on, it was hitting my body. And
Oh,
I'll tell
totally.
this one story, and I want to hear if you've ever. I
Yeah.
I was working in a toxic environment, and I met with a counselor, and I was describing it to her, and I remember because this is how we were raised, saying to her, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I can't deal with these people. I don't know why,
Mm,
it's so hard for me to deal with this. And
mm,
she, white woman, looked at me and said, why do you think you're supposed to be able to survive in a
mm,
toxic environment? And I'm
mm.
like, because that's the story of my people in America. I mean, that's
Keep pushing,
what
keep
we
moving.
that's what we've done. But it's nice to see the next generation saying, I don't have to put up with that. It's a
Yes.
balance between being able to just let it roll off your back and not take it personally and say, I'm gonna place myself in an environment that's better than this.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some of the best advice I got was from white women. And I'm like, you guys got a little bit of entitlement. I need to start borrowing. Like, seriously,
Yes.
taking my days off. I've never tried to roll over any vacation days. Any vacation days I got done. Like I blocked my
Yeah.
calendar. I had to
Yeah.
learn that too. I'm like, and I started saying I gotta leave work because I was single. Like, how long meet somebody if I'm always at work? Let's try to get, let's try to have a family. I mean, that was something I had as a vision for myself. And I tell people all the time, if you got goals and dreams, put them down on paper, remind yourself, or you're going to shortchange your life. The other thing, honestly, in my career is because of what I did, I felt like I had a bigger mission. Like, I need to be in this seat because I need people to see what they can be it students. I
Mm.
spoke a lot at universities. I made a point and not always asking for permission to do so. I was in the community a lot. I wanted to make sure Black women saw me. And so when I went to plant sites, lots of agricultural stuff and lots of plants and manufacturing, I made a point. I said, I want to go down to the line right now. And I wanted people to look up and say, "Whoa, what the?" And I have so many great fond memories of being there in the fields, in the production facility, asking questions and looking people in the eye and saying, "So happy you're here. Thank you for what you do." The retail
Mm.
stores. I know it made a difference because when I was working and saw a sister walk through, I'm like, "Oh, I could do this. Okay." And and people will write me notes, and it's not self-gratiating. It's really about it does matter. Like I would tell women in a meeting, um, don't underestimate yourself. You are doing an awesome job. I feel blessed to be able to have gone through the weathering. I didn't
Mhm.
enjoy it, all of it, but I think because of that, my back's a little straighter, and I can help other people know they can get through it. Because our ancestors went through a lot of stuff, and we kind of feel a
Well,
little
that's the
bit.
other thing too. The weathering they're saying is passed down in our genes. I mean, the trauma that our ancestors went through. So we have a lot of things to overcome,
You
and
do.
we have to find ways to do that personally, and hopefully, be able to pass something on to the next generation. So, how have you
Beautiful
been
point.
able to do that?
It's a beautiful point. I do think it becomes ingrained in the way we overprotect our kids sometimes, and rightly so. I mean, they seem to be targeted more and more. But I think the words that we say to them and the way we act in situations matter. Um, so I just want them to know that they are already here as a child of God, ready to do big things, but they don't need the burden of all that extra stuff. Now, I do tell them be careful. I tell them to use their gut and to be wise around who they're around. But we can't continue to tell them, you better watch out. Black people don't ski. You gotta be
Mhm.
6 times as good because if you don't, because you know what, there's enough going on. So we just need to kind of think about, are we being overindulgent in that same thing that we got passed on to, right? From our very protective families, rightly so. But at some point, you keep clipping people's wings; they can't fly. I think that the next generation will be different. I do hope that they figure out the positive things that we brought to them, like bonding and having community, which is super important as they continue to grow outside of their nest. They got to build community because that's what helped us sustain and build and grow is building community within every place that we've been. We know where to go, eat, their hair done, socialize, worship. Those pieces of community are very important. So just teaching them those skills is critical.
Because sometimes you need to lay that armor down, right? You can go play the game and be tough, but sometimes you need to be in a community where you don't have to do that.
That's right. You just want to come home and take the bra off. Yeah.
Amen. Or never put it on in the first place. Um, sorry.
I love it. Yeah. Just be free.
What other things did you do to take care of yourself to stay well and strong?
So I think I hope it comes across. I stay positive. I mean, just telling a cousin of mine that when my mother's house turned into turmoil last spring and we had to do a lot of repairs, I said, there's a really bunch of positive things that came out of this. First of all, the insurance covered most of it. Secondly, the house is in much better shape than it was, so she can sell it and get into a better living situation. Thirdly, there was a cousin who I was talking to that we got closer because she kept coming over to visit and check on the house. I didn't know you as well. There's so many
Mm.
positive things that came out of this disaster for my mom's house, right? But that's what I try to do is pivot on the positive because I like to laugh, I like to smile, and That has got me through some tears. Like, that's why I just became more of a person that would laugh at a so crazy situation, saying, you actually think that's the truth. But I think the positivity that helps. And then to me, what you give is what you get back. And so I've been able to get back a lot of positivity, a bunch of things saying, hey, come on, let's go do this. And, let's get on the bandwagon. But there's still people who like to pull me down. I'm not going to buy. There's some people who just don't get me. I'm not for everyone, and that's okay. I don't care. My job is not to please everybody. My job is to make the imprint I can make on the people that I can make it with in a way that God told me to do it. So that's where I am today.
We talked a lot about what you did to, manage yourself as a Black woman in this big career. But are there systemic changes that you wish would be made so that maybe it would be easier for the next generation of Black women corporate leaders?
Absolutely. And people got to get trained on bias. There's no question that you cannot keep putting people in leadership roles without testing for and challenge them on their bias. Because no matter what I've seen, I've rarely, and even with Black people, I rarely see folks automatically uplift a Black person. Like, an example of the Black woman coming and surrounding me was a beautiful, unique experience. But and the second thing is, don't just hire people, like, have a plan for them. Have people who care enough to hire the right people, because we're all qualified that we get in these doggone doors, and nurture their career. And I actually had the benefit of that happening to me. And after a while, I do believe in karma. I do believe in people get their just dues. I ain't got time to be worried about you. I'm trying to make sure people in my circle are feeling empowered and embraced and loved, because if you keep going down that dark path into the abyss, you just throw your hands up and just want to go to sleep. Can't. So I try to veer into things that I can change and impact. Keep going, keep moving, keep pushing, keep showing for other people what could be. We just gotta just veer into the light.
Yes, thank you for everything you do, Jackie. I want you to think about a young Black woman who's in leadership, whether corporate or academia or wherever, and she's starting out her career, new leader. What advice would you give her?
I would say also, just first of all, be true to yourself. Be true to yourself, and bring forward who you are. And I know people are resistant to cry at work, resistant to be who they are, but bring your best place, bring your best self, bring your truthful self forward, because you'll regret it if you don't. And people need to see that. And then have respites. Like, you have to have a place to go to take the armor off, to unwind, to laugh, to toast, to praise. And you got to have those places. If you don't, you will be sad. And I do not like seeing women walking around with their shoulders slumped, just feeling unsupported. So you have to be your best self inside and outside work, and find what brings you joy, and keep at it. I mean, people know faith and family were my mantra. If those things weren't right, I wasn't coming to work right. So that's my foundation. I took off all the days I could to see my kids do their things. I don't regret any of it. So I just really want women to know there's somebody there to support you. Please reach out. Please feel okay with feeling not so okay some days. Use your vacation, but be true to yourself and don't ever lose who you are.
Wow, Jackie is a powerhouse. What a career she had. She's really an example of a person who can pursue a big career in a space that's not typically a place where Black women are, but also make sure to carve out what you need for yourself to stay healthy, to not give work everything, so that you can also be there for your family, for your relationships, and for your community.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that helps keep you in balance, which is important. She said certain things just never got in the way of her family or her faith, which were the most important things. So remaining balanced for yourself is something that we have to do just so we can remain healthy, mentally and physically.
And that's the real lesson for me from this conversation, is setting boundaries. That you show up and you work hard, but you also have to step back to make space for caring for yourself.
Yes, and she did that very well. And what was really important to her outside of those things was supporting other women and other people who worked for her. She found a way to use setting boundaries for herself as a lesson for others. Thanks for listening. We hope this episode inspires you to increase your body wealth. If you like our show, please subscribe and tell a friend. For resources related to this topic, please see the show notes. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at Body Wealth Sisters.
The Body Wealth Podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider. We also want to remind you that the views expressed by our guests are their own. This podcast is dedicated to our mother, Jean Fernandez Barbour, who showed us what advocating for yourself really looks like.